The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Quinn Din from SEARAC, the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our SEARAC COVID-19 call and listening session. To get us started, we just really wanted to thank you all for making time to join us, especially during this time when we're navigating so much uncertainty with the health and safety of our loved ones. And we know that you all are doing so much great work at the front lines as well. And just want to send our appreciations for joining us in community today. So to get started, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. My name again is Quinn Din. I'm the Executive Director of SEARAC. And today we are joined by our great team, including Kam Mua, our Immigration Policy Director, Anna Bion, our Education Policy Manager, and Gina Lei, our Field Associate, along with one of our partners, Meredith Owen, Deputy Director of Policy and Advocacy for Church World Service. And to give folks a little bit of context for why we decided to host this call today, we actually were starting to receive a lot of calls and emails even before the stimulus package was signed, which you'll hear about later today. Folks were asking us how they should address questions related to whether community members would be eligible for unemployment, or if they would get the $1,200 stimulus check and how would they get it out. We were also getting lots of questions and concerns around who's going to be left out of receiving relief. So to respond, we decided to organize this call and also have our colleagues at Church World Service join us because of the incredible amount of work that they've been doing in terms of tracking the resources and who's eligible and who's not eligible under this time. And so to start out, thank you all to the presenters again. And for logistics, I just wanted to remind our participants that all attendees are placed on mute right now. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you'll have to be logged onto the webinar platform, unfortunately. So if you're joining us by phone, you'll only be able to hear our dialogue today. If you'd like to ask a question or comment during the webinar, feel free to do that using the chat box. And you'll see that if you look on the left-hand side of your control panel, you'll be able to type your question or comment under the question section. And if you can direct them to the webinar organizer, Gina will help to make sure that those questions get to the presenters. And finally, as a couple reminders, we'll also be recording this webinar and sharing it through social media later this week. So if you have colleagues or community members who would like to listen in on the recording, know that that resource will be available. And also there is a handout section in the GoToWebinar panel as well, which includes the PDF of this PowerPoint as well as resources that will be shared later today. And with that, we'll go ahead and share with folks what the flow of the day of our call will look like. We'll start by sharing with folks what is currently available under the stimulus package and its benefits, including economic impact, education, health, small business relief, and unemployment insurance. And then we'll transition to Q&A about those benefits, have an opportunity to hear from you all on what you're experiencing and seeing, and then closing out to give folks a sense of what SEARAC's priorities are and how we're navigating under this new environment. And before we get into our presentation, we love to start our calls with polls to start engaging with folks as much as possible. So we'll start our first poll here, which is to ask folks, what are the impacts of COVID-19 that you're seeing in your communities? You'll see that the options are job layoffs, issues with remote learning or education, with students now doing most of their learning digitally, any experiences around anti-Asian hate crimes or harassment, housing insecurity, or food insecurity. So we'll go ahead and keep this open for just about another 5 seconds or so. And any last respondents, feel free to hop on. Okay, and let's go ahead and close out our poll and share with folks what folks are experiencing. So it looks like the vast majority of folks on this call are seeing a lot of job layoffs, a lot of challenges for students and young people navigating this new digital environment, a lot of experiences around violence or hate or harassment, followed by food insecurity and housing insecurity, which are connected to the job layoffs and the financial insecurity that folks are experiencing right now too. So we really want to thank you all for sharing those experiences with us. And hopefully the content of today's call will help us to see what are some of the resources that are available to help address some of these challenges that we're seeing now. So with that, Paul, thank you all so much, and I'll transition our presentation portion to Com to begin sharing out on the benefits that are available.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Quinn, for kicking us off. I want to just start by saying that, you know, the CARES Act and the other two bills that came before it have a number of relief options for individuals living in the U.S. That are generally rolling out now and being implemented, but there's still a lot that's missing from these benefits, and there are still a significant number of people living in the U.S. who do not have access. That said, you know, the purpose of what we're covering today is to, you know, quickly reference some of the benefits that are immediately available to individuals and to grant relief. And we'll address some of the other issues that are still missing from the current set of benefits in our closing with what SEARAC is doing. So Gina, next slide. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the economic impact payments. Some of you may have already seen a direct payment of $1,200 or somewhere between $0 and $1,200 in the last couple of days. So part of the CARES Act was a $1,200 direct payment to individuals with a Social Security number living in the U.S. The way that they're doing it is based on 2018 tax returns, or if you file 2019 tax returns, it's based on that number or that income that you had submitted. Essentially, a single individual with a Social Security number can get up to $1,200 in this period, and they get an additional $500 for each minor dependent who they claim on their taxes. So that's someone who's 16 or younger. Additionally, if you file, a joint tax return, you are eligible for $2,400 to get $2,400 back through that set of returns. The other item to point out is just that if you're the head of the household, your threshold for the $1,200 is a little bit higher at $112,500. And this begins to phase out as you the higher your income is. So you'll see that in this chart, if you make $99,000 a year, you won't be getting anything back. And the chart also details it for married individuals at $198,000 and heads of households at $136,000. Next slide. So this is just a quick flow chart to identify your eligibility for the economic impact payment. Essentially, you have to have a Social Security number in order to get the payment. If you filed your taxes and you have indicated a direct deposit account, you'll see that the payment automatically in your bank account. If you did not file taxes or were not required to file taxes, you'll have to go to the IRS website to submit a short application in order for them to send you the direct payment. Additionally, if you have Social Security retirement, disability, or survivor benefits, you don't have to do anything, and you'll automatically receive the $1,200 as part of a monthly installment in your in your account. Next slide. So we're expecting that these payments will be rolled out mid-April. So it's already coming out now for folks who have direct deposit enabled. For individuals who do not and prefer a physical check, where it was expected to, the government was expected to start rolling them out on April 24th. But we've heard in the last day or two that there are expected to be delays because the president and the Treasury Department are asking to print his name or stamp his name in the metal line of the checks, which will likely cause a delay in the rollout of physical copies of the checks. Additionally, there is one exception for individuals in terms of whether or not they'll get a payment, and that's if you have outstanding child support. If you do, you will not get any of this. If you did not file taxes or were not required to file taxes in 2018 or 2019, like I said, you can go to the IRS website, look for the non-filers, enter your payment info application, and that's where you'll fill out your income information and your bank account and your Social Security number in order to get your payments. There are a few things to just note for the economic impact payments. If you previously made over $99,000 or more in 2018 or in 2019, but are no longer employed, unfortunately, you're going to be ineligible for a payment. And for individuals who have moved since they have filed a tax return, you'll have to actually go to the IRS website, and you'll have a few options. First is notifying your post office of your change of address, or filing and submitting either an IRS form 8822 or 8822B. And then the last option is sending in a written address change information to the IRS address that was listed in the instructions for your tax return forms, with your full name, old and new address, Social Security number, or employer identification number, and then your signature in order for that to happen. And it'll take about 4 to 6 weeks for that to be processed. So if at all possible, the easiest way to do this is just through direct deposits. And I believe that's the end of this section, so I'm just going to hand it off over to Anna.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Anna. I'm the Education Policy Manager here at SEARAC, and I just wanted to walk through some benefits in regards to both K-12 and higher education for folks in the last 3 COVID-19 stimulus bills. The first one is in higher education for folks who have taken out student loans to finance your post-secondary endeavors. Essentially, under the CARES Act, the Department of Education has suspended all required monthly payments until the end of this fiscal year, which ends on September 30th, 2020. That means that if you owe if you owe money on your student debt to pay down your student debt every month, if you don't pay your monthly payments until September 30th, it's fine. No one's going to ding you. You don't have to pay them. You can, of course, choose to pay them if you can afford it right now, but there will be no consequences to not paying them for now. On top of that, the Department of Education has halted interest as well on your student loans. So you don't have to pay your monthly payments, nor will they be accruing interest during this time until September 30th, 2020. Any suspended payments also will actually count for any of the debt forgiveness or loan rehabilitation programs. So if any of y'all are teachers and are looking for public service loan forgiveness, or if you're a nonprofit employee or a government worker, and you happen to be already enrolled in public service loan forgiveness, assuming that you have already met all of the requirements to be enrolled in that program, this period of time will also count towards that, even if you're not making your monthly payments. Additionally, if you have been subject to, for example, wage garnishment or tax offsets because of involuntary collection of any loans that have defaulted, that's also being suspended until September 30th as well, to provide student holders of student debt with some relief. Additionally, if you're a borrower who withdrew from your school as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, the direct loan from the Department of Education associated with that payment period in which you withdrew, so this semester basically, will be canceled. However, I do want to emphasize that this does leave out about 9 million borrowers because it only applies to people who hold direct loans and FFEL loans that are held by the Department of Education. So direct loans are pretty much automatically Department of Education held, but there are some FFEL loans that is owned by the Department of Education and some that are commercially held. Those commercially held FFEL loans are not eligible for these benefits. Another set of loans that are not eligible are Perkins loans. If you hold those, they're not being counted as well. And so we really encourage you to get in touch with your loan servicer if you don't know what kind of student loan you have, so that you can make sure that, because we don't want you to be in a position where you think these benefits are the suspension of payments and interest are applying to you, but they don't, and then you end up in forbearance. Just to the best that you can, we recommend you get in touch with your loan servicer to make sure that your loans are eligible for these benefits if you don't know who already holds your loan. I would also encourage you to persist in trying to contact your loan servicer. Currently, call volumes for loan servicers are at an absolute high, with so many people trying to get in touch about various provisions about their loans in the midst of this crisis. So it may take a few tries to get in touch with your student loan servicer. It took me about 15 to 20 minutes on last Friday to try to get in touch with mine. And my federal loans are held by Fed loans. So it might not be as bad as some of the reports that I've been hearing, but just persist and you will get in touch with them. Next slide, please. I've already gone over this. Great. And then just another note on the Department of Ed getting in touch with you about some of these changes. Most of your servicers should have already gotten in touch with you via a letter or some sort of secure online communication informing you of the suspension of those payments. Not all of the communications are worded well, so if you have any questions about what you're entitled to under the CARES Act, feel free to hop on his SEARAC's website as well. Again, I had gotten in touch with my loan servicer last week, and a lot of these provisions were kind of hidden in mumbo jumbo from my loan servicer. So just be sure to read between those lines. But they will be getting in touch with you within 15 days of any of these implemented changes, many of which should have already gotten into effect. So that is what folks who hold student debt are going to be able to benefit from during this time under the CARES Act. For those of you who have children who are enrolled in public schools and have questions about school meals, the federal stimulus bills also provide some relief for families who may be in need of school meals during this time as well. If you're enrolled in part of the free and reduced price lunch program, for example. The CARES Act created a waiver system for the Department of Agriculture to allow some states to provide meals outside of what is currently required under the federal meal programs within school buildings during school times. granted that your state applies for the waiver and is approved for it by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, states can choose to provide meals outside of congregate feeding settings, such as like a lunchroom in a lunchroom cafeteria in a school. And they could choose to distribute at sites where families pick up the meals or deliver to children's homes, provide flexibility to the meal service time requirements so that it doesn't just have to be at lunchtime for lunch, for example, or breakfast at exactly breakfast time. It may also allow, these waivers may also allow parents or guardians to pick up meals and take them home to children without their children being present, because some children may be immunocompromised and it may not be safe for them to be out and about during this time. And this could apply to any of the federal child nutrition programs, including the ones listed on the slide. There's also another program, this time actually under the Families First, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is the second stimulus bill, which allows states to apply for something called a PEBT program. PEBT would provide families with an EBT card, similarly to SNAP, with the value of with the monetary value of the free school breakfast and lunch reimbursement rates for children who are missing out on those because your schools are closed. And it would just be a card that you get and can use like an EBT card. However, your states do have to apply for these things. And so, and most states have not submitted an application. Some states have, but very few have so far been approved. So if this is a benefit that your family is relying on to feed your children, please do get in touch with your school district or your state education agency to see if your state has applied. And if they haven't, or if they're still waiting on word from USDA, just really encourage them to follow up on this and let them know that this is a need that you're seeing with your family and your community. And I think with that, I'll kick it off to Kham.
So for healthcare access, we'll keep this relatively short. But essentially check with your insurer and the State Department of your State Department of Health for the most accurate information, given that different states have expanded coverage options and some insurers have opted to cover additional COVID-related costs. That said, the CARES Act and the Families First Coronavirus Response Act put a few things in place for different health insurance options. So, private health insurance, Medicare, TRICARE, Veterans Affairs, and federal worker health plans are required to cover COVID-19 testing and associated visits related to COVID-19. For Medicaid, what's covered is COVID-19 testing and then just testing related services at the moment. I will mention that, one of the shortfalls of the bill is that it doesn't completely cover treatment for COVID-19 illness. So that's one of the things that we're still looking at for the fourth package. The last thing to just know for healthcare access is that if you are uninsured, part of the CARES Act is part of what it did was that it allowed states the option to expand Medicaid coverage to uninsured individuals, but that's at the discretion of the states. So if you're uninsured, it's best to contact your Department of Health to see if you qualify for a health insurance option. Another thing to note is that, if you are currently uninsured, although the ACA open enrollment period has closed, there are a few exceptions. The first is that, if you've lost your job, your health insurance as a result of job loss, you are automatically allowed to have sort of a special enrollment period where you can enroll in the ACA marketplace, even though it's currently closed. One. And then two, 11 states and the District of Columbia have also kept their healthcare marketplaces open during this pandemic. So you'll want to check with your state as well to see what their deadline is for enrollment. It ranges from early April through mid-June. So our recommendation again is to just check your state's website or the Department of Health and see if there is an option if you can enroll if you're currently uninsured. Some states also have expanded coverage. So California, Colorado, Maryland, Nevada, Alaska, and New Hampshire have mandated expanded health insurance coverage. And then, some of the other states like Massachusetts and New Mexico also have, testing and treatment coverage for certain health insurance options as well. So it all just sort of is a bit different state by state. Next slide. And the last item I'll talk about before handing it off to Meredith is just small business relief. So there are two real programs that are currently eligible for small businesses to apply for during this time. The first is the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP for short, and it's used to retain staff, payroll, to retain your staff. So that's paying for payroll, paid leave, healthcare, maintenance of your operations. And this loan, if it's used for those strict purposes, will be completely forgiven. The thing to mention about the PPP is that it's first come, first serve. So if you're a small business owner, or if you operate a nonprofit, you're self-employed, or you're an independent contractor, you should apply now before the funds run out. The other thing to just flag about this one is that the amount that you'll be allocated, that you can borrow, is generally the cost of your 2 months worth of salary multiplied by 2.5. So for example, if your operating expenses for a month is about $10,000, the total loan amount that you can borrow is about $25,000 to cover those expenses. You should speak with your lender if you want to borrow through the PPP program. The other program to flag is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which can also be used to pay for very similar things as the PPP. So they include debt, your rent, mortgage, utilities, payroll. There is no forgiveness in this program. However, there's a $10,000 emergency cash advance grant that's also sort of rolled into the EIDL that is forgivable. And the eligibility for this is similar to the PPP program. So it's small businesses that are less than 500 employee and nonprofits that are facing financial hardship. In terms of just steps for the program, what you'll want to do is actually go to this Small Business Administration website and apply to see to see what the loan amount is before going to your lender to apply for the loan. Next slide. So just in terms of things to keep in mind, you can apply for both PPP and EIDL so long as you're not using both of those loans to pay for the same thing. So for example, you can use a portion of PPP and EIDL to pay for payroll. So they should just be applied separately. There are two other programs specifically available for organizations and businesses that currently have either SBA loans already or are applying for an EIDL loan. And part of that is the SBA Express Bridge loans, which is just a quicker application to get a portion of loans from the EIDL, which will then be covered by that loan that you take out, because there's a large backlog right now. And then the other is just the SBA debt relief, and that's again just deferral of interest and payments if you already have an existing loan through the Small Business Administration. So you can go to the SBA.gov funding-programs /loans /coronavirus -relief-options to check out the loans that they currently have. And again, it's first come, first serve. So, our recommendation for a lot of small businesses and nonprofits and self-employed and individual contractors is to apply for the program now before the funds run out. So that's it for small businesses, and kicking it over to Meredith.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to be speaking on the unemployment insurance provisions that have been expanded by the COVID-related legislation. And on this slide, you can see that careeronestop.org is a great place to be connected with your state unemployment office and receive information about how to go about submitting your application for unemployment benefits. In general, what the COVID legislation did was expand benefits to include more people, especially gig workers, independent contractors, self-employed folks, as well as do their best to make people whole by virtue of adding on additional monies that people could receive each week, which I'll talk through, extending the number of weeks people would be able to receive unemployment benefits, and making these things available for part of or the full duration of the rest of the calendar year. Next slide, please. In most states, state unemployment insurance benefits are 26 weeks, although there are 8 states that are fewer than 26 weeks, namely Florida is one that's only 12. But the CARES Act that was enacted on March 27th added an additional 13 weeks of UI to be made immediately available to workers. The CARES Act also ensured that there would be flexibility in terms of the work search requirements for folks to be eligible to receive benefits, and is encouraging states to waive, if they haven't already done so, the 1-week waiting period before receiving benefits, so that states would be reimbursed by the federal government for waiving that 1-week waiting period. It's also important to note that UI expansion is not considered income for Medicaid or CHIP eligibility. However, UI benefits can be counted for those who are on SNAP or food stamps. Anyone with work authorization can apply. There's no minimum residency requirement. So, for example, if you arrived as a refugee in October of 2019 and you've been working, you've been laid off or whatnot, or are underemployed as a result of COVID-19, you would be able to seek unemployment insurance benefits. It's also important to note that what I'm going to talk through, each state has to work with the federal government to get some of the new programs set up, and they're at different stages of being set up. So we don't have answers to everyone's questions yet. But in general, the recommendation is that if you are unemployed or underemployed as a result of COVID-19, you should be submitting online your application to receive unemployment benefits, and the unemployment office will contact you by phone or via email if they require additional information from you. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about very quickly the different programs that now exist. So certainly, I talked about the additional 13 weeks of benefits that is tacked on to state UI. So that's called Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, or PEUC. And so if you have exhausted or will exhaust your state UI without finding a new job, you get that at 13 additional weeks of benefits. For anyone who is not eligible for state UI and PEUC, for example, if you don't meet the work history requirements or whatnot, or you're a gig worker ineligible for state UI in certain states, you may instead be eligible for a new program called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or PUA. So PUA is specifically for individuals not eligible for state UI who are unemployed, unable to work, or partially unemployed because of COVID-19, or provided care for someone in the household directly impacted by COVID-19. So PUA provides 39 weeks of your state's average unemployment insurance. Now, this is retroactive. PUA goes back to January 27th and goes until December 31st of 2020. So you'd be eligible for up to 39 weeks anywhere in that time frame. For anyone who's receiving state UI, PEUC, or PUA, any of those individuals can also receive Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, or PUC. PUC provides an additional $600 per week, which goes from March 27th, the date that the legislation was enacted, until July 31st. So it's basically an additional 4 months of weekly income of $600. It is important to note, though, that these payments are also not income specifically for purposes of eligibility for Medicaid or CHIP. And that while the process to receive PUA is still being set up in most states, you should do your best to apply for UI benefits sooner rather than later, given the volume of applications that UI offices are receiving. Next slide, please. This slide is a quick flow chart to see whether you may or may not be eligible for the various programs. I think it's also important to note that it's important that folks have work authorization that I said before to benefit from unemployment insurance, and that requires that the individual had work authorization during their time that they were employed, at the time that they apply for unemployment benefits, and during the time that they receive unemployment benefits. And that's because a person has to be able and willing to return to work as soon as they find work, and that requires then that that person have work authorization. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and it's basically friends of ours from National Employment Law Project and Family Values Work put together a flow chart that is a combination of eligibility for unemployment insurance and or the paid leave provisions enacted as part of the Family First Act earlier in March. And so this gives you a sense of what you might be eligible for, depending on whether you are still working and employed, or are underemployed or unemployed at this point. So with that, I think that's my time. So I'm gonna pass it over to talk about resources, followed by Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Meredith. And before we get to Q&A, as Meredith shared, we wanted to share with folks some of the resources that we've been collating here at SEARAC to make sure that folks know that it's available. So on the next slide, you'll see a link to our COVID-19 resource hub. So that's at www.searac.org/COVID-19 resources. We've been curating in-language resources in Khmer, Hmong, Lao, and Vietnamese as it relates to COVID-19. There's also information about how to report hate crimes, and also how to access resources for folks who are victims of hate crimes, and also a list of mutual aid networks across the country who are setting up programs to provide direct services and relief and access to these programs for their community members. And we also wanted to remind folks of the careeronestop.org website, which Meredith also had on her slide. Essentially, this is a great website to get basic information about COVID-19 unemployment insurance information, including whether you're eligible, and then links to your state's unemployment application directly. And so with that, we'll head into our poll question before we open it up for a Q&A. And so we know we shared a lot of information with folks. So we'd love to hear back on what type of resources are needed, but are either hard to find or have not yet been created for your community. And you'll see that our options here are in-language resources, information on economic relief and eligibility, information on healthcare and coverage, information on how to report hate crimes, or information on community impacts and needs that folks are experiencing right now. So we'll go ahead and keep the poll open for about another 10 seconds for folks to respond. And we'll give folks just about another 5 seconds. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and close out our poll and see what folks are experiencing, and we'll share back with the community. So thank you all so much for your responses. It looks like overwhelmingly, what is really lacking right now is information around economic relief and eligibility, different unemployment options, as well as the stimulus checks, and also information on how the community is being impacted and what are some of the urgent needs that we're experiencing, which is a great segue into our next portion around Q&A and conversation from you all. So for our Q&A session, just a reminder that if you'd like to join by audio or verbally, feel free to click on the raise hand icon, which you'll see on the left-hand side of your control panel. And just a couple ground rules is to make sure that we're respecting different points of views, to please share your name and organization if you're associated with one, and then to provide your remarks within about 2 minutes to allow us to get through other participants. And as always, you can always type in a question or comment in the question or the chat toolbar or toolbox as well. And so we did get a couple great questions already from folks. I think the one that we'll start with is the one that we have fielded the most questions about. And I think this will go to Meredith. So for work authorizations to qualify for unemployment, how can that be explained to someone who works under the table or are getting paid essentially cash? Are they eligible, and what would you suggest they do?
Yeah, so for people who are working under the table, it can be complicated. So I'll answer it in terms of like the technical answer, and then sort of what I'm understanding of what's happening in practice. Basically, in general, people who are paid under the table are, if they were to apply for state unemployment insurance, that would mean that technically they're being paid illegally and not paying taxes that fund unemployment benefits. So as a result, the employee is not initially eligible for benefits they file a claim for. So if the state and the IRS discovered that an employee was paid under the table, then the employer would have to go back and pay all the back taxes that they owe to the IRS and the state, as well as the penalties and interest, and file the federal and state tax forms they failed to send in on time. That being said, given the new program, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA, it is possible that people paid under the table could consider trying to obtain PUA benefits as some type of like freelancer, as long as they self-certify that they're partially or fully unemployed, or otherwise unable or unavailable to work for COVID-19 related reasons. That still comes with its own risk because you still have to provide your information to your state unemployment office, which is likely to find out then that that individual was paid under the table and the employer wasn't, contributing to the unemployment benefit pool. To be really candid and honest, I also understand that it is highly unlikely that state unemployment offices are going to have the capacity to do that investigation for PUA applicants. And so while I would never provide, formal or official advice for people paid under the table necessarily to give their information to state unemployment offices, in this case, it is it is possible that you could apply for PUA benefits and receive them without necessarily being investigated for paying your taxes beforehand, though it does come with its own level of risk. In that same vein, they would also explore whether you meet the other requirements like work authorization. But given the slow pace with which states have been able to stand up the PUA program, you may or may not be found out.
Great, thank you so much, Meredith. So unfortunately, there isn't a great answer to this question, and we definitely recognize that this is one of the major challenges our communities are facing. But thank you so much for that helpful tip in terms of how to navigate these resources right now. We have a couple other questions around unemployment as well. So I think this next question will also go to you, Meredith, but folks can also feel free to hop on. So for unemployment benefits, what's the best path under the ones provided for someone who was laid off from the work and are within weeks or months of being of retirement age and eligible to get retirement benefits? And this is
question.
Okay, great. And then this person shared that they're hearing this from many elders in the community.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I understand that folks could get to retirement age and choose to retire. I personally, if I were trying to decide whether to retire or not, I would look at whether your unemployment benefits is higher or lower than retirement benefits that you may receive depending on where you're employed and what you may be entitled to or eligible for. For those who are receiving unemployment benefits, though, it doesn't matter if you were thinking about possibly retiring soon. You can still receive your state unemployment benefits so long as you have like that attachment to the workforce and are directly and are impacted by COVID-19. But there is some level of work search requirement, though flexibly interpreted. The person would have to be making, a good faith effort that is reasonable to be finding a new job. So at that point, the person decided that they no longer wanted to receive unemployment benefits and instead transition to retirement benefits, they could, but it would depend on, what retirement benefits they and like the amount of money they would actually start receiving. If they're receiving pandemic unemployment assistance, which is extended for 39 weeks total, versus being in a state that has like only 12 weeks of state unemployment plus the 13-week extension from PEUC, that's 25 weeks of assistance. So I think basically people need to do the math as to what helps them the most in terms of money coming in, and make a decision that's right for them.
Great, thank you so much. And I think for our community, sometimes doing that math and finding someone who can help you navigate that is really hard as well. So it's really helpful to have this context from you. And one last question around the unemployment before we go to some of the other questions, like small businesses and the PPP. It's actually a recommendation from one of our community members, is for folks who are working under the table, for those families, would applying for state welfare assistance and or food stamp programs be a helpful suggestion?
Yeah, yes. Especially because unemployment benefits are counted towards SNAP and food stamps. It would behoove anyone who isn't otherwise eligible for these specific programs or doesn't want to take the risk, to make sure that they are still benefiting from the other programs that they may be eligible for. And while Families First Act and the CARES Act didn't really expand SNAP or TANF too much, there's a lot of advocacy in the community to see expansion in those areas as part of the future COVID-related negotiations that are happening as part of the next package.
Great, thank you so much. And shifting to the small business questions, I think this is where a lot of the other set of questions are coming from. So one of our questions is about sharing more about how small and micro businesses are accessing these relief programs, or essentially what folks are hearing is that many are not eligible or feel unclear, so they don't apply. Additionally, most of the small or micro businesses don't want to get loans because they don't have any income and don't want to take the risk. And that the businesses here are nail salons, barber salons, independent contractors, consultants, etc. There is also another question in the same vein around the complicated nature of PPP for small business owners, is clarifying if there's a stipulation for PPP that funds must be used to keep employees through June in order for those funds to be forgiven, which may be problematic because small business owners might not be able to convince their employees to work through June if they're also eligible for unemployment during this time, or increases in unemployment. So Com or Meredith, if either one of you want to take that question, that'd be great, and then I'd be happy to add on.
Yeah, Quinn, I feel like the first question might be, you might be more adept at handling, but at least within the documents that the Small Business Administration have put out, in terms of eligibility, I think so long as you have you show a financial need, and you, as a small business, have less than 500 employees, you technically are eligible. The interest rate is also capped at 1% for the PPP, so it's generally a pretty, lenient set of loans. But I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Quinn. I can answer the second question though.
Sure. I would just say we don't have a great answer to this question now, as the person who asked it probably knows. But essentially, as Com shared, many of our small business owners are actually eligible, but accessing the program is really hard for a variety of reasons. One is that, for example, you need, most lenders require that you have a business checking account with them already. And almost all of the processes are online and in English. So if you have language barriers, you're not going to be wanting to navigate that application form. There's also a lot of documentation that you need to provide in order to substantiate how many employees you have, what the health insurance rate was, how much you paid in terms of rent and all that, because as we know, lots of our small businesses don't have a lot of that accounting infrastructure or processes in place. And so that's a lot of the challenges that we're hearing. One of the groups that we work with, National Capacity, is really leading the charge to call for modifications in the next stimulus package so that some of these implementation steps are lessened and more resources are available to small businesses to access these programs that they're eligible for. And also the expansion around the different types of small businesses that go beyond those who employ less than 500. So the short answer is that advocates are still working on this to make these small business loans more accessible for our communities, especially small mom and pop shops.
And to the second question about the stipulation in the PPP that small businesses are required to keep employees through June. We forgot to mention that, but yes, that's correct. Part of the forgiveness is that small businesses who take out the PPP loan is expected to keep their same headcount to June. Part of the question was whether or not, individuals who decide to leave the company would have a negative impact on forgiveness. The statute itself doesn't say whether or not, it doesn't directly address that. While we can't say with 100% certainty, it seems like so long as you keep the same headcount, the forgiveness should apply. But I mean, I would just check with your lender as well. But at least in the statute, there's no direct answer to that piece.
Great, thank you, Com. And we have a lot of really great questions and we're at time, so I'm kind of stuck at what we should do. I think we'll do one last question and then I'll do a wrap up. And the question is, if a non-citizen applies for food stamps today, and since the president says if you apply for federal aid that your citizenship would be denied, does this hold true?
I can take that. So I think you're referring to the public charge determination. So if you're already a U.S. Lawful permanent resident, you can still apply for food stamps without getting your citizenship denied. The public charge standard or determination only affects individuals who are changing their status or applying for a green card. So, if you're already a lawful permanent resident, you should already have access to, accessing food stamps wouldn't change whether or not you can become a U.S. citizen. It's important to keep in mind that, the public charge determination is really problematic, but, a lot of the public benefits that are also available are not exactly available to folks who are not lawful permanent residents already. And then the other thing to just sort of add on to this is that, for just to keep in line with the COVID package is that the stimulus checks that folks are getting also is not counted towards public charge determinations as well, and are not counted towards, SNAP eligibility or towards, any eligibility for public benefit programs, just because it's not considered part of your income. And wouldn't be considered as part of your income for at a minimum of 12 months.
Great, thank you so much, Com. So the short answer is we definitely want to encourage folks to apply for those public aid benefits. And a quick clarification question or a quick clarification comment from our community member around the small businesses is actually a great point. is that a lot of these businesses are not essential businesses, so they can't even stay open, especially under shelter-in-place laws right now. So thank you all so much for sharing your feedback. The work continues. As many of us have shared, a lot of folks are still being left out of what is being discussed right now in stimulus relief, and it's incredibly painful, which is why we're so grateful and blessed that you all are really at the helm at your communities and providing relief and care for your loved ones and the community at large. There were lots of questions. There were a couple questions around education and what we're seeing, where we definitely are seeing digital divides that are impacting young people and their ability to access their education right now. And some questions around whether schools or colleges are providing tuition relief. And I believe that this is kind of being done on an individual basis, and we haven't heard a whole lot of movement on that. But we'll be sure to synthesize these questions and comments and share that out with the community. And as I close out, just wanted to share with folks what we're doing here at SEARAC during this time. And so if we go to our next couple slides, just wanted to share with folks that our community is experiencing this pandemic at a time that is actually also our 45th year anniversary, arriving here to the US as the largest community of refugees ever to be resettled in America. So now more than ever, we know that we're leveraging our history of resilience to really get through this together. We are a community that has survived war, that has survived famine and genocide. And our goal at SEARAC is to make sure that we're continuing to mobilize these collective strengths so that we can care for each other. So our priorities are really to listen, to share, to advocate, to voice, and to mobilize during this time. Some folks shared the importance of getting counted for the Census 2020. And I just wanted to uplift that here as one of our major strategies that we're continuing to commit to through increased digital organizing, because it's through getting counted that our hospitals are better resourced, that our young people have access to lunch and breakfast, that our workforce have resources for development and training, and that our schools have the infrastructure to really close the digital divide that so many of our community members are still facing. And so we want to thank you all for your engagement again. The next slide includes a summary of what we're advocating for in the fourth package for the stimulus, including some priorities that have been longstanding for our communities, including disaggregated data, including access to language resources for testing, treatment, and recovery, increasing health access, including expanding Medicaid, and also economic benefits to all individuals. And then also making sure that right now we're also being true to immigrant justice and releasing all detained immigrants, and stopping deportations for folks with travel restrictions to the US, and making sure that we're providing translated materials and in-language materials that go beyond written materials as well, beyond Spanish. And with that, we just want to thank you all so much again. If folks have follow-up questions, please feel free to contact Com or Anna. Their contact information is listed on this last slide. Meredith's email is mowen@cwsglobal.org or covid19@rcusa.org. Thank you so much, Meredith, for your allyship and your incredible work. And thank you all so much again to our community for joining us. We know that this is an issue that is really about life and death for our loved ones, and that for many of us, we have actually already experienced some of those losses. So we really want to honor those experiences and their lives and their story and history by joining us to really advocate for a better today and tomorrow, so that their death would not have been in vain, and so that this does not happen again to our generation or the next generation. Thank you all so much. If you would love to stay connected, please feel free to join us for our April community call next week. And we'll be following up with a recording of this webinar as well as synthesized questions and comments. Thank you all so much again. Be well, and sending you all our blessings for health and safety.